Sam Pisani, Managing Partner at the Logit Group, and welcome back to our second episode of our Logit Influencer Series. Today, we'll be discussing how market research companies can elevate insights through storytelling, dashboarding, and data visualization. Joining us today is Roben Allong, founder and CEO of Lightbeam Communications, a microcultural research and strategy boutique. She's also the vice president of QRCA and a 2020 MRX Diversity Champion Award nominee. Priscilla McKinney, the CEO and resident Mama Bird at Little Bird Marketing, her award-winning digital-first agency brings marketing chaos to clarity with its proprietary strategy-based lead generation system. And Donald Williams, a data strategist and analytics solutions consultant with deep functional knowledge of analytics platforms. He provides specialized expertise, cross-industry perspective, and solutions to help organizations to leverage their data and drive business results. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Now, being on the research execution side of the MR space, where most of our clients are research consultancies or agencies, Logit does pay considerable attention and effort to helping our clients maximize their ability to tell the research story. It's critical for MR agencies to add business value through insights. Recently, as an example, a client of ours asked us to expand our role in supporting a 40-country tracker, not just by collecting the data and sourcing panel and providing tabulated data, but also helping develop a customized dashboard so that end client can disseminate the insights to a wider internal audience. It's obvious that the future of insights is exciting. It's a topic that's worth discussing, and we're delighted to have you all here. So let's get right into it. First question I've got for the panel is, how can strategies like storytelling and data visualization help MR companies better understand their customers from a business perspective?
Well, I'll kick it off here for us in this conversation, but I think before we even talk about how storytelling and data can be used, I think there's a one step back that we have to really come at this whole issue by saying there's a conundrum at hand. On one hand, we're selling something. Everybody is, even if they think they're not, whether it's their product, their service, whether it's their thought leadership, et cetera, et cetera. And the conundrum, on the other hand, is that nobody wants to be sold to. Right. So this is live. This is the conundrum we find ourselves in. And this is where marketing and market research really then need to lean on the data, need to lean on storytelling to start understanding who it is they're selling to and exactly how they would like to be talked to, how you could actually approach someone in a way that is respectful and rapport building. And so, I'm going to kind of take it from my perspective is my degree is in cultural anthropology. So I would just say from the beginning, if we're not out there looking to understand our actual most ideal client and looking to tailor everything that we do around them, then I don't know exactly what any firm is doing. And so when you ask me then the specific question, how can strategies like storytelling and data visualization actually help market researchers understand their customers from a business perspective? I would say that anything that gets you out of your perspective, whether we want to call that like, the emic and editors, but it's just being outside of us and being able to look at everything from our most ideal client's perspective. And when you hear a powerful story, you can be shook, I feel like, from your own perspectives, from your own embedded beliefs that you may not even be aware of. And you can finally, for that one moment, be free and actually see something from someone else's perspective. So for me, that is 100% why it is absolutely imperative.
Sam, thanks for having me on. I think I'd like to, kind of build on what Priscilla is saying, but actually take it in a slightly different, direction. Storytelling is very individual, right? When we think of someone telling a story, we think of them telling it from their perspective. And storytelling has become the term that we toss about in marketing and in research. So tell better stories. But I'd like to sort of point us in the direction of who's telling the stories. Storytelling is really moving into a new phase. It's really about the story being told, but by whom, from which perspective. And I think savvy market research companies and insight teams are beginning to understand that, because you can have someone tell a story And it doesn't really cover the cultural nuances that are necessary to give that company a competitive edge. That's what's really emerging when we talk about especially microculturalism, the idea of, you want to hear the story from the audience you're targeting, but you want to hear it from their perspective, not with the overlay of a different perspective from a different ethnicity, perhaps. So I say this because, BIPOC audiences, especially, their stories are being told, but it's always has been from the vantage point of another ethnicity. So the perspective is not always the same. And the key is you want to get those nuances that come from the source of the story. So, when you look at storytelling, you're going to have to get deeper. You're going to have to get broader as well to increase that connection, and do not overlook those nuances that potentially could get lost or marginalized. So by offering a platform for these kinds of storytelling to occur, to be heard, it's a tremendous advantage because it's a secret. It's offering a secret. It's understanding those little nuances now that's getting beyond just the surface. And that's what's going to give your market research company, your insights team, a competitive advantage. It's those nuances. If you don't understand them.
I love that you brought that up. I love that you brought that up because I think as researchers, I think we're in a, there are a lot of buzzwords right now across industry about diversity, representation. But I think as researchers, the ability for us to tell the story and whatever those insights are, collecting the data, tell that story. If we're not as diverse and representative and able to speak from those various vantage points as researchers that are sitting back and observing, then we'll never be able to tell the full scope of the story. I think it's a great point. I mean, it's actually something that Logit has seen in Canada, especially. We've been working diligently as an industry to try and ensure that as an industry we're diverse and we're representative. We just actually this year launched our BIPOC Research Scholarship for postgraduates at Humber College to actually help in Canada ensure that we can be as representative as a research community, because I think it's fantastic. If we're looking at things from a certain more limited, narrow lens, we'll never be even fully able to tell the true story to our clients. I think that's an excellent point.
Just before Don connects in there, I just want to add that to that, Roben. I think there's that danger there of, especially for someone like you in the place that you have and where you sit in the market space where people want to do multicultural research and they want to engage that way. But we need to make sure it's just not just a check mark of something that people are getting done, but more to your point, this idea of the storytelling needs to really be we need to hear it from the source and not have it washed over and reinterpreted and then come out into the light of day for people to make business decisions on. It needs to really be very, very true to that source. And I think that's where we need to stay as an industry as we do make these diversity moves that should have been done forever ago, but it doesn't matter. Here we are. But as we do that, we need to make sure that it's not checklisting and we're making it kind of like, oh yeah, did that. And then it's business as usual.
I'll let Don jump in, because Don has been for several years working in the space of ethnic research, cultural research, and diversity research in Canada. So, Don?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Priscilla. I think what I want to say is that if you were to ask me the same question a year ago, my answer would be different. I think over the past 6 months or so working with small business clients, what I've realized is that storytelling has to be directly connected to their business. So what drives the success of their business? And I think the key that I've seen over the number of discussions with small business clients is that what they're looking for is not a level of sophistication, but it's a level of simplicity. So I think we go back to the definition of what is storytelling. And I think it starts with the data, the narrative, and the story, whether you frame it within visualization. And in those different parts of the storytelling process, you need to connect that to how it's going to answer key questions. And I look at it from the perspective of a year ago, it was about the data, it was about the technology, it was about the statistics. Now it's all about how can it's like, so what? So you have given me this data, what am I going to do with it? How is it going to impact my business? How do you then draw narratives from the data to allow, in a scenario where you're working with clients, allow your clients to make those decisions that will drive their business? And I think it's important when we put it in the context of storytelling that, as Roben pointed out, there are different audiences within who are consuming those stories. And so the story itself has a different context for each audience. So it's important to allow the end user to see the value of those stories within their business, or in a scenario of even social impact programs, to see how will that impact or change or move the needle for those programs.
Well, so let's think.
I'll give you a quick example. I'll give you a quick example, Sam. So recently completed a study, and it was financial services sector, right? Because everyone who's listening in on this, webinar, this podcast wants to figure out, well, how do I apply that? What? This is all great, woo, but how do I apply that? And so we're doing, a whole bunch of interviews, talking to different ethnicities about investing and the idea of when you get paid, right? Disposable income, having disposable income to whether you're investing in your 401k, cryptocurrency, whatever, sort of floats your boat. And an interesting observation was the idea of communication, whether electronic, digital, however you are doing outreach to your customers. And we had a couple people say, you know what, if you don't hit me just when I get paid, and you send me digital communication a week later or 2 weeks later, that money's gone because it's been applied to X, Y, and Z. And, and this was coming from a specific person of color. Yeah. So listen, you got to hit me right there. To me, nuance number one, payday. You need to sync up very easily, sync up your communications to paydays. Number one. Number two, that's not just for, it started maybe in one ethnicity, among, Black people, but this is really, when you're thinking of scaling, this is really for anybody that makes a certain or that lives at a certain level. That come payday, that's when you've got to send out all your notices in order to get them to think about your product and to invest at that time. Now, that came out of a marginalized community, but it's applicable to just about any community that lives at that sort of paycheck to paycheck level. Doesn't mean they don't want to invest. It just means that you've got to hit them at the right time. Those are the cultural nuances that you have to listen for, but it's only going to come from that audience, right? It's only going to come from that consumer, and then you interpret it to say, aha, I get it. Now I know what to do.
Now, the first company that finally listens to that and capitalizes on it is going to be way, way ahead of the competition.
It'll be a home run for them. Yeah,
absolutely. Because companies typically have been looking and using even storytelling, looking for like the big opening. But I think that one of the interesting things about storytelling and data visualization is that it opens up interesting niche opportunities within companies. And when we think about like the bigger scale where companies are, sometimes there are some plateaus at which they cannot continue to build and add to their numbers. For example, I'll use a really big example, Netflix. At some point, you have captured everybody who is going to be streaming, right? And even they're fully aware of it, how many memberships are shared amongst people. But they are going to come to a point in which they have sold as many subscriptions as they possibly can. So what are the alternatives? And this is kind of like a big piece of company growth. If you can take that and apply that to your company and how that applies, there are opportunities that are niche, truly serving specific communities that can be a tremendous boon to your company if you only listen to those singular stories.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I think one of the challenges that I also see is we have more data than we've had in the past 5 years. So when you look at the amount of information that's available to marketers, there is no shortages of data. But I think the problem, though, that we face is that we make it so complex and complicated that we miss what holds true for the past 100 years. It hasn't really changed from a consumer perspective. Yes, we have more choices. Yes, we have more challenges. But I think the notion of, if you're looking at it from a business perspective, I want to increase profit. I want to increase customers. I want to increase market share. That's a fundamental principle that has held true for the past 100 years or so. But then how do we actually use data to provide answers to some of those key questions without making it too complicated? And I think that's what's, for me, and even for myself too, I've in the past, maybe I've made things too complicated when you're trying to provide insights to clients, that you're thinking from your perspective, not from the client perspective. And so you miss the opportunity.
Plus, I think there has been, at least historically, kind of a perception or a limitation that the non-savvy research consumers on the business side, so people that don't traditionally absorb research or stakeholders directly in the research side, just they're not able to absorb. There's kind of a gap of absorbing all the numbers that we would traditionally provide as researchers, the very dry reports and decks and hundreds of pages of tables or qual reports. And thus the need for that data visualization, that storytelling, that human approach to stripping down the data and the numbers and the thousands of tables to a messaging format that's easily, for lack of a better term, digestible, accessible, and comfortable for all the stakeholders in the organization that your client is, for them to absorb it. So not just the research and insights manager, but all those brand managers, regional managers, people that are going to actually be able to access the information, and to your point, Priscilla, about selling it and actually being able to turn that into a sale, be able to actually convert that, whether it's an example I'm thinking of is a few years ago, we had a client and they were a large US-based convenience store chain, and they needed to drill down to get the people on the ground, boots on the ground, the information that was coming through the research. So it completely changed how we collected the data, completely changed how we helped our consultant client report the data, so that they could actually empower these brand managers down to the sales regional folks to actually be able to communicate all the way down to like the single store manager to say, hey, this is what's going to drive success for us. And it was hugely successful. And just a couple of years before that, the data was only seen by a small handful of national brand managers. And then it became hundreds, if not thousands of people that saw it. So my question is from the visual side, how can visual MR tools help to reveal that human element that we've been talking about? That's behind market research practices and behind that in general. So how do we open that up?
I think I would take one piece from what you're saying about getting more people who have their hand in, whether it's the marketing message, whether it's how we're actually maybe even in R&D, wherever they are in the scale of things. the one thing you're talking about is taking this information and listening to the story, and to Robin's point, hearing it unwashed, seeing people's perspective, looking at the data, getting more people to look at it. That can inform content and messaging. Where Robin took it was that also informs timing. That's very important to talk about, the overarching timing of campaigns. But then for me, where I see the storytelling and the data visualization not seeping in is when people choose platforms. And this is something that people really come at with a unconscious bias. They think that everybody's on the social media platforms that they're on, or everybody uses email the way they use email, or everybody uses their phone the way they use. But that is not true. And I think some of the storytelling and I think the visualization of actually seeing how people are truly interacting with your product, your service, your brand should also enlighten that third aspect, which is please quit using your own preferences. Get back to using, take a look at all of that data and say, not where my eyeballs want to be, but where my most ideal clients' eyeballs are. Let me serve them in the places most comfortable to them. And, to Robin's point there's a lot of cultural nuance to be understood about the where also. And so I feel like the data visualization and storytelling sometimes gets a little bit, but it doesn't get deep enough into the entire business impact decision. And I think, to your point, Sam, getting more people to look at the data would be helpful.
I love that point, because I listened to a podcast with the founder of Good Data, and he's all about embedded analytics. But what he said that struck me is that oftentimes the people who provide the technical side of it, they're so caught up in technology, and they miss what the user actually need. So it becomes a science project or a technical project, and when people talk about the data, they talk about it in terms of technical terms rather than from the user perspective. This is how I want to see it. And to your point, Priscilla, is when we have preferences for certain platforms, even for certain dashboard tools, then we tend to push data in those tools, not necessarily understanding that users want to consume it differently at their own pace rather than at your pace.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point, which I think often gets it's not actually shared, across the stakeholders.
I would agree definitely, Dawn and Priscilla, and kind of build on that. So obviously I'm coming more from the qualitative world, and it's been interesting this year of COVID to see how visualization tools have in some regard superseded actual in-person, because we weren't able to do in-person research. And what do I mean by that? Well, when we weren't able to do it, obviously, qualitative researchers were forced to turn to tech tools that were available, whatever platform to gather the data. And what started to emerge was this kind of very interesting dichotomy where the technology had improved so much over the course of the year on these platforms that you were getting different kinds of stories, and you were actually seeing them in real time, whereas perhaps in a focus group or IDI that's limited by time, you don't have the ability to get some of those stories. You might get one or two versus being able to go on Revelation or Recollective or any one of those platforms and get 20, 30 different stories that have varying degrees of richness. So we're in a real transition when it comes to tools and visualization. And my prediction is the tools are just going to get better and better and better. Not saying that they would ever replace in person, but I do think we're at the beginning of a visualization age that is going to be tremendous. And if you're not prepared for it, I think that's going to be a handicap if you're not prepared for it, because we are going to move into the hologram world and, all this kind of stuff, because tech is moving way faster than us. So I think that there is a beauty in it. And also, too, there is a lot of richness from online tools and actually seeing video. No, it's not comparable to in person yet, but I think it's just a matter of time.
It's interesting you bring that up, because it's almost like as fast paced as everything has become, this reminds me of something that I mean, going back 30, 40 years, Canadian philosopher Marshall McLuhan had said a long time ago that the medium becomes the message. And it's almost like we're interweaving how we're doing this, and how we're doing it is becoming part of the finding itself and is impacting the finding.
Absolutely, because when you sit in a focus group and you're telling a story, right? Of course, it all depends on the respondents and blah, blah, and all this other, you've got a whole bunch of other stuff, but you're sitting with 8 strangers. Or you might be sitting, if you do a pair or something like that, a dyad or a triad, it could be a friendship, but there's a different dynamic going on versus you sitting with your mobile phone, recording yourself, telling a story about when this happened to you, or how you like this product more than that product. It's a completely different, we have yet to see how it's really going to unfold, but there is completely, as you're saying, different information coming in, even though we're using the same sort of storytelling technique. But it's going to be interesting to see how that impacts market research, and how that impacts how we go about collecting, and what kind of information. Now, I think we're going to have to drill down in terms of when we're collecting and what tools we're going to use to collect, to extract that information.
Well, you mentioned that. I recall. Sorry, go ahead, Priscilla.
Technology is going to increase, Roben, with, we're going to be able to gather more and more samples, which I think is really, for anybody looking for diversity and to hear all voices, super important. The more we can hear. But, I know that what is going to become in short supply is people, with experience like Dawn and with you, Roben, where you understand the nuances that you can't get from any kind of a technology driving out data. We still need those people who truly understand how to take those answers and put them into context of real people's lives so that we can understand what it is they're saying. It's not about the words. We all know this. We speak different languages. It's not about the words I'm saying. It's about the meaning I'm trying to impart. And we're always going to need experts at this level really helping us understand, even if it's in English, what really was the meaning that this participant was driving for. And I'm excited, because I think the more we have technology, I think there is going to be bigger and bigger space for voices like your own. And I think all of us, I could speak for all of us when I say we're tired of companies telling us what it is we think. For me, as a white Hispanic, I'm tired of someone telling me how I vote. I don't vote that way. Please quit reading this data incorrectly, and we're exhausted by this kind of stuff. And so I think the more technology drives us, the more we're going to have time for this kind of specialized conversation that's going to drive more meaningful change at companies.
I think there is an opportunity for market research companies like Logit to probably provide opportunities or address some of the gap between qual and quant. So back in the day, you would see a job saying you need someone with qual and quant capabilities or skill set. Now you see a divergent. You need a data scientist and you need a qual person. And there's no overlap. So the data scientist needs to understand what the qual person do. And the qual person needs to understand what data scientists do to actually make the stories richer and more meaningful to the end user. So I think it's important for market researchers to hire the right talent. And I think the term around storytellers, which is in my culture, storytellers have been part of history. And in folklore culture, and it's very engaging. I think transferring some of that skill set into how you tell the story to clients through visuals is going to be really appealing. And from the market research standpoint, that's what's going to differentiate you between company A and company B, because that's what the client is going to look at. You're able to interpret a story or provide me with an insight that I see applicable to my market, rather than just using a kind of a cookie or a template approach.
But now there's gonna have to be some degree of, for lack of a better term, standardization. I mean, at the end of the day, we're gonna have to deliver our findings to clients in some capacity. And I know, Dawn, you've been working with your current client base, especially with focusing on dashboarding in a way to better visualize and leverage that data for not just your client, but again, to filter it down. So if we just look at dashboarding for a moment, because I know that's been one of the key subject matters that you've been drilling down into now, how are MR companies going to do that? How are they going to leverage that information in being as broad and agnostic and flexible as we've talked about today, and the need for it, for voices, for perspective, and for audience, but also taking a degree of standardized approach in whatever tool, be it a dashboarding tool or something else, to actually deliver it?
So I look at it in a couple of ways. So I think the most important thing is about context, and I think with technology you can provide insights within context, because you can take bits and pieces of multiple data sets and put it into a format where you have the capabilities to aggregate it for different audiences. So I think one of the keys actually to understand what data assets you have available to you, whether it's internal or external, to then provide some way of bringing those assets together. Because let's say, for example, from a data collection standpoint, you might be doing survey research, but if you can overlay transactional behavioral data on top of that survey data, and then provide dashboards that are within a certain theme, then that allows the user to have a better value for the insight. So one of the tools that I've been looking at, and it's available within BI Intelligence tool, is the ability to customize based on the user. So it's called parameter matching. So basically, the user sets a certain persona, and the data is filtered based on that persona. So for example, you have a data warehouse, and a user might be looking specifically at only certain consumer profiles, or might be looking at information that's pertaining to a certain market within a market. But because you have a data warehouse, you can then use the technology to filter that data onto a dashboard to different users based on what they need. So I think the critical piece to that is leveraging technology and looking at the data assets that's available within your organization to allow you to provide something that's flexible.
My only concern, about dashboards and people using them is that I think people get kind of back to my idea of preferences. Market research firms kind of get stuck in their own preferences. They find tools that they really like, so they stick with them, because let's face it, everybody's busy, right? And who wants to stop and go either vet a new platform or learn a new platform, because we got work that needs to get out the door and the client's waiting and it's already been bid and it has a deadline and all these things. But it is the job in the industry also to keep up with what some of these different technology pieces do it, because not one technology out there is, what I would call, the ring. It's not the one ring to unite them all. That's a myth, right? And just a couple of things I'd bring to mind. Two that popped into my mind, like SiteX, what they're doing out in New York with this, what Dawn is referring to, like, being able to segment, your data based on these audiences and these created personas. Very interesting. What Inguo is doing with being able to take multiple data sets that you already have and feed them in and understand causal analytics. I mean, there are some things that are just very heady, but yet bringing some things pretty simple. I guess what I'm trying to say with this is, I think for market research firms, they need to be cautious that they don't just go to certain dashboards because it's easy and because they're familiar with how to work it, so then they can actually extract the data. I think they always need to be thinking and being curious about what else is out there so that we can understand, that data and maybe look at it differently, pick it up and say, well, maybe what if I flipped it over, and just that sense of curiosity, which I think is natural in this industry. We need to make sure we're still doing that in the face of technology.
I think, but it's interesting, Priscilla, you bring that up, because I think as researchers, we've had this conversation or this conundrum put forth in front of us before, maybe not in the storytelling and in the representation, but I mean, even from the methodological aspect. I mean, years ago, firms were quickly kind of finding their own camps about, we're going to be an online firm. We're going to be, we're firms that maintain largely caddy presence. And to your point, I mean, when I look at my experience at Logit, we purposefully remained agnostic on the methodological side, because we didn't want the methodology and what we were selling to drive what we were going to try and solve for the client, but we wanted it to be the other way around. I mean, client has challenge X, and we're going to find the pluses and minuses around every methodology. To your point, it's the same as, are we going to report everything the same way? Is it going to all get loaded into that same dashboard, that same visualization tool? And it's convenient, but it's still narrowing for how we're able to communicate with our clients. So I think there are challenges that we as researchers have had at various stages of our industry and various stages of the life cycle of a project. And now it's really bubbling up at that end stage, right when we're trying to expand what our research consumers are hoping to see, and providing the broadest level of representation with the data that we're providing. I think it's interesting because it's like the more that changes, the more that really stays the same in the debates that we're having internally within our industry. It's just what segment of our industries is being challenged and needs to reinvent itself for the benefit of what we're offering, not just from the business side, but from the benefit of what we're actually doing as practitioners.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the transformation, and you can see a number of organizations who are doing this. If you guys are familiar with Google Analytics, there is an insight tools within the analytic platform. So it provides, using machine learning, AI, provides, it's almost like your own consulting market researcher within the platform itself. So it looks at the data and it looks at certain metrics and then build a story around that. So that allows the user it reduces some of the complexity of working through the data. Because as you know, when you use Google Analytics platform, there's a lot of information flowing through. From the user perspective, they want to know is what's driving my traffic, what content is converting, and so there's a simplification to that process. So it's taking complex tasks and making them simple rather than the other way around. So I think one of the challenges that we've faced in the past 2 years is because we've had more than ever more data scientists than before, is that we get caught up in statistics rather than in insights. So we have to pull it back and so dashboard becomes provider of insights rather than statistics. It's not just that you're going to take an Excel table and provide it in a dashboard format, but you want to simplify it for the user. And there are limitations to dashboards. I mean, dashboard is not the end-all solution. Obviously, in the toolkit, from the market researcher standpoint, there are different tools that you will provide for your clients. And I think to say dashboard is, I mean, some companies focus primarily on dashboard because for them, dashboard is kind of the sexy tool. It's visualization with beautiful charts. But what I've seen, like with some of my clients, is that you might provide them with a dashboard, but then still there are questions on, so what? What am I going to do with this now? So it becomes, there's an endpoint to how far you can go with dashboard. And it's to try to push it further, you're getting into a kind of a gray zone.
Well, I think it's clear. We've talked about how do we make the information digestible, and I think the point you brought up is if we just go too far, then we've almost kind of we've wrecked the plot of what we're trying to do. We're trying to make it more digestible and broader in scope, but we're making it so dense that it's counterintuitive to what we're trying to accomplish. So if I turn to all three of you and ask you questions, so if looking at the insights industry and if you were to kind of provide them with some perspective as to what they can do to help their stakeholders, their clients kind of drill down, let's call it that diamond level insight. How do we get to that nugget that provides that maximum value? And again, I think Priscilla brought up at the beginning of the conversation to still balance our business interests with our insights interests and our client stakeholders. How do we help them drill down to that diamond level insight?
I think that the first thing I would say is check where you're drilling. If we're going to use the oil, if we're going to use the oil.
That's fantastic.
Sometimes you're drilling in a dry hole, and you just, move the drill to another hole. Send out your prospectors, who would be your insights team, to drill into a more mineral-rich hole. That's the first thing. And what is that? That is your foundational research. You need to do a research audit. Where have you been? What success has that yielded? Perhaps that hole is now dry and you need to move on to another one in order to continue to get these rich insights. The second is perhaps it takes adjusting the drill bit that you're using. So a lot of times, market research, we're always looking for that broad, like, oh, this is nice, this little nugget over here, but I need to figure out how to scale up. That's what I need from you. I need for it to be actionable. I need for it to, go across my entire, customer base, nationwide, globally. Okay, well, perhaps you need to change the drill bit, because sometimes with a different kind of bit, you're able to access veins that are much richer than where you've been drilling. Mm-hmm. So you need to take a look at that as well. Who is your team? Who is your supplier? Who is, delivering the insights to you? Perhaps it's having a conversation with them. And by that also too, conversations with stakeholders. Perhaps it's time to refresh with them as well to figure out, how are you using these insights? Do you use them? Do you throw that 100-page deck in the bin? Let's find out a little bit more about that. So the next time that we go into drill, we're getting the type of oil. Is it sweet crude? Is it this other kind of oil? The type of oil that we really need. So those would be my sort of 3 tips off the bat in terms of, going diamond. You want to get diamond.
I love that analogy. I love that analogy. And you know what? I mean, we might find out by asking our client that they're taking that research and they just want to make sure that there's something on their shelf, that 300-400 page deck that's just sitting there because if anyone ever needs to pull it off, but it's not on a day-to-day actionable basis that they're using that information. But I think it brings up an interesting question of, as researchers, we shouldn't assume that we're necessarily always going down the right path. That audit, that second step of saying, hang on a second, are we going down the right path? And let's make sure, for the benefit of our end user, that we are, is that sober second thought that maybe a lot of researchers aren't undertaking right now, or are working under the bias that they are, whatever path they're going down to initiate that research is the path that they need to be going down. And I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah, because when a client calls, do you second guess your client? Do you ever say, well, client, do you really know what No, that's not it. It's more about, hey, we're going on this journey together. Let's look at the GPS. Let's see where we've been and where we'd like to go and how fast we'd like to get there and who are we bringing along for the ride, and are we having a picnic? Are we putting some food in the van with us? Who's going here? So that way when we take the trip together, everyone is on the same page. And I think this goes for qual and for quant. You know, any research undertaking, it's worth it given where we are today, the change in culture, the change in political climate, economic climate, you know, health climate, to simply assess where are we? Mm-hmm. Where have we been? The context, right? As Don was pointing out, where we've been, where we are. Okay, now where are we trying to get to? And what kind of vehicle are we going to use to get there? Who's going to be on the ride? And, you know, who's in the pilot seat?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I so agree, Roben. And I would add a little bit more information about the who's going with us, right? I think market research firms, whether it's qual or quant, I think a lot of times they kind of hands off the point where we start selecting respondents. Where are the participants coming from? How are they being sourced? Are they really equitable? And I would probably say, my friend Mario Carrasco from Think Now likes to say, if you're not doing multicultural research, I'm not really sure you're doing research. This idea. But we have had these systems where we take respondents for granted. And my friend Lisa Wilding Brown from Innovate MR likes to refer to the respondents in market research as polar caps. Right? Once they're gone, right? We need to take better care of these respondents and make sure that we're sourcing them where is the most likely place for us to actually get a real balanced view of today's consumer. So we need to, I would really strongly suggest to market research firms, don't just hands off and bring a vendor in to bring the participants, but to Roben's point, ask more of the questions. Who should be coming along with us? What does this look like? Where do we source them? Because listen, COVID upset the apple cart and it needed to be upset for a long time. So we were starting to hear from different respondents who had never participated in market research before, were never interested. We had an opportunity where everybody's lives were interrupted, and that breaking a pattern is an opportunity to get new qual and new quant people involved in this market research. But we have to treat them right when they're involved in the research. And we have to make sure that we are being mindful and not just letting it be someone else's job to check on the quality of that respondent.
Well, and I think that's where companies like Logit, where we're on the execution side of research, and our client base is largely other consultancies and other agencies, that we're finding ourselves closer to the end client because we're being brought in to assist with that, to have another perspective, to advise on methodology. And even, I mean, it's funny you mentioned that, even the term sample. I mean, that we're not looking for a homogeneous group of people, kind of one group, monolithic, the sample that we're going to fill within the survey. There are a lot of different threads, components, socioeconomic, ethnic, cultural, diverse groups that we need to interweave to make that strongest rope as possible. Threads will break, but if we get those various threads to combine together to get a stronger sense of representativeness, it's going to build that kind of stronger rope that's going to actually survive your stress testing of your research.
100%.
Today, we're in a multicultural society. We're multicultural, meaning that there's a dominant culture and other, microcultures sort of feed into the dominant culture. Tomorrow, we're going to be in a polycultural state, which is the idea of you have many cultures beginning to sort of, make up the dominant culture. And for the future, we're going to be in the microcultural sector, where now you have microcultures taking, their individual stands. And there is not going to be a dominant, and in the US, at least demographics wise, certainly in the next 10 years, 15 years, I think, there is no white majority anymore. So if you're not thinking about these things, 10 years will be here in a flash. Technology is thinking about them. So if you're not thinking about them, then you might find yourself handicapped in some way. So I think on this program, the idea is, hey, this is what's here today. This is potentially what's coming tomorrow. It would behoove you to start to think about, hey, how, what can your business do? What are the actions you can take with regard to your insights team, how you mine insights, and also to how you consume them.
I think that's a perfect way to wrap things up, Robin. On behalf of Logit, my team, Priscilla, Robin, Donald, I'd like to thank you. This was an awesome conversation, and I think we went down, not only did we cover more than we were hoping to cover, but we covered just different subject matter, and the depth was phenomenal. I'd like to thank you all for participating, and until next time, thanks very much.
Care.
Great, thank you.